All right.
Did I look at the camera?
You don't have to. You can look at me.
Okay.
Yeah. So, tell us who you are.
My name is Dr. Jane Alexander Robinson. I'm a PhD licensed clinical psychologist, and my practice was in schools in Detroit with the Detroit Public School System, and I have had a private practice there also in the Fisher Building in Detroit, Michigan, as a clinical psychologist.
Why did they call you the mother of Michigan Black psychology? Where did that come from?
Well, that name was given to me by the National Association of Black Psychologists, I guess because I worked, they felt very, very hard for the chapter in Michigan in attempting to actually organize the chapter with the help of other people, but to continue it and to involve the students who were studying at University of Michigan and also at Michigan State University, because they would come to our meetings. And I think that's where the name came from.
Wow, golly. How did Michigan Association of Black Psychologists get started?
Well, there
When
was
was
a
that?
group, there were very few psychologists in Michigan at the time. There were maybe about 6 of us, maybe 8. We used to meet once a month. A lady named Gwen Wade sort of brought us together once a month.
Gwen Wade?
Gwen Wade.
W-A-D-E?
Yes,
Okay.
W-A-D-E. She was a master's level school psychologist, as I was, and she knew the other psychologists that were in school systems primarily. And she suggested we get together and have lunch once a month, just to talk about things of interest to us, like why are they using these culturally biased tests? Why do we have to use them to test black students and put them into special education classes? That was our main concern and focus. But just because we were sort of rare people, there weren't too many psychologists, so we liked to get together and chat. And we would meet once a month, and the men liked to have a little drink, so we'd meet at Mr. Mike's bar on Woodward Avenue in Detroit.
Around what year was that?
Oh, that was around 1968. 67, that kind of thing. And we've been meeting about a year and talking. And what happened was our meeting was scheduled the day after, eventually we learned, that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And we were sitting around talking as usually, expecting some dinner. And the bartender said, we'll have to close because we're afraid of rioting. There's been rioting all over the nation because of this. And I said to the group, I said, we keep coming and complaining about the test, but we don't really do anything. Let's do something. Let's organize and see if we can be active in doing something about these tests and these other inequities, because of the bias of the social science researchers that are out there today, all white people. So we began meeting at my home instead of the bar, and we met there for, I'm sure, about 3 years, every month in my home, in my living room. And I'd make coffee and nobody ever drank it. I think it was too strong or something, but they never drank a cup of it. But anyway, and the students were invited in also. So our first officers, starting in 1968 to 71, was Floyd Wiley, PhD, he's deceased now. Reggie Wilson was the first vice president and treasury, and I was the secretary, and Shirley Vaughn, and Dozier Thornton from Michigan State University was a member at large. The next year, Reggie Wilson was president from 71 to 73. Maurice White was vice president and treasurer, and Shirley Vaughn was the secretary.
Shirley Vaughn, you said?
Yes, Shirley Vaughn.
V-A-U?
V-A-U-G-H-N.
Okay.
She was an M.A. psychologist who worked in the court with Willie Scott.
Ah.
And anyway, she was very active with us, very faithful member. And the first student members, the first founding fathers or mothers were Wynn Wade, Jane Robinson, Maurice White, Reggie Wilson, Jonas Chenault, he was from Michigan State, and Patricia Smith and Ottawa Hammy. And
what do you remember from that first meeting, Mom?
the first meeting,
Yeah.
well, we talked about the things that we were concerned about, the same things we had mentioned when we'd meet down in Mr. Mike's, and the need to organize, because I said we need to do something. So we set about doing something, and one of the things we wanted to do was outreach to the community, the black community, to inform them of what was going on with these unfair tests. That was very essential to us, and that was one of the things.
Yeah.
And to serve the citizens group better and let them know what was going on, because we were sure if they did, they would take some action.
Right.
So
who came up with the name? How did you all come up with the name for the organization? And what name did you come up with?
Michigan Association of Black Psychologists.
Wow.
The white society was the American Psychological Association, so naturally we would take, some of those phrases from that. Michigan Association of Black Psychologists. And then very shortly, because there was a group out of California that had met in California the summer before, or sometime before, this meeting in Washington, D.C., where the students stormed the stage of the American Psychological Association meeting and stopped the convention and made a 10-point demand on these white psychologists that they do something to change the system so it's more fair and equitable to blacks and black culture. And they had been meeting in California the year before, and so they were from University of Michigan. So
who were some of those students' names that you remember?
Oh yeah, James Jackson, we're so proud of him. He eventually became president of ABSI. Frank Yates, Harvey Reed, the McAdoos, John and Harriet McAdoo, Juanita Cole, Oscar Cole, Carl Jorgensen, Roseanne Greer, Robbie Turner, Algia Harris was from Detroit, Jonas Chenault, Arthur Mathis were from Michigan State University. And so they were involved, and they would come to our meetings.
How about Halford?
Hal Fairchild.
Was he there too?
He was from, he was there as a student member from University of Michigan. And we were very proud of him. He became a president of the National Association of Black Psychologists.
Wow.
But they were all in that group that stormed up on the stage. And you have that from the archives, you have that picture where they stormed up on the stage.
When you heard about it, how were you feeling? What were you...
Heard about them up on the stage?
Yeah,
we were there at the convention.
You were there at the convention?
Oh yeah, we would go to the American Psychological Association convention every year.
Okay.
And we'd go, and we were sitting in the bar watching the screen. And Floyd Wiley, I said, oh my, we should go in and have. Floyd Wiley says, no, let the students do their thing, stop mothering them, they can handle it, And they did a beautiful job.
Wow.
Yes, uh-huh.
So that's where you saw them.
Yeah, and this famous picture,
Wow.
I call it famous.
Yeah.
Because it says Negroes charge racism in panel discussion. They demand of professional psychologists a 10-point program. One was to get more students in PhD programs because we had so few black psychologists who would better understand the needs of the black community. We needed more in PhD programs. People had applied. I had applied to University of Michigan. They turned me down. Twice I applied. So that changed it for me, and a few years later I was able to get in a PhD program at University of Detroit, in Detroit, which is a better situation for me. But that was one of the things, to get more black psychologists to address the cultural bias of the tests against blacks, to have our culture incorporated in the tests, and do away with unfair tests. Those were some of the things.
Wow, some of the demands. So tell me more about the Michigan organization. So you've taken us from April 1968, after the assassination of Dr. King. You all had already met and had meetings, and then you heard about the California group getting together, and also the students' demands at APA, right?
Yeah, we were there in Washington, D.C.
And you were there. So what happened that made it into a national, from what you can remember? What happened to the Michigan chapter when the national started?
Oh, Michigan kept on meeting as Michigan Association of Black Psychologists. And of course we were in touch with what was going on with the National Association of Black Psychologists. They organized themselves too.
How did you communicate with each other, I guess?
Well, sometimes we wrote letters. Back then we didn't have Facebook, or we didn't have the internet, that kind of thing. So, and postage was very expensive. So sometimes we'd send out letters. And I like to say that when we, signed, we often signed "yours in the struggle." And these were not only, you see, other groups were organizing too. The black social workers were organized, the black teachers. That came out of that era, and that era of black protests and what I call the Black Liberation Movement. So we would meet with other groups in other cities. I'm sure somewhere I saw Stokely Carmichael, and people like that. We would have Preston Wilcox, I think was another name. But we were all meeting together in various cities, trying to work for the same thing, the liberation of black people, the minds of black people from this oppression that was put upon us.
So did you go outside of Michigan to go to some of these meetings?
Yes, well, I remember going to Indiana for one, and in other places. I'm sure a couple of other places. One I think was in Washington, D.C. Weston Prescott was leading that, the Black Teachers Educational Association.
But what about just the black psychologists coming together? Did you go to anything outside of Michigan?
No.
Okay.
No. We did affiliate eventually with the regional chapter, and Paris Fenner Williams was president at that time.
Okay, of the Michigan chapter, you mean?
The Midwest.
Oh, Midwest
Regional. Yes, but that was a little later on.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure of the year.
So what I'm kind of asking is, when and how did Michigan connect with the national? How did they come together?
Well, they would communicate with us.
Okay.
We were one of their chapters. We would communicate with them.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd go to the convention every year.
So did the national know about the Michigan chapter?
Oh, yes, right from the beginning.
Okay.
Oh, sure, right. We were all there together.
Okay. You mean at APA you were all there?
Yes, because we went to APA before the National Association of Black Psychologists even started. It would be our habit of going every year to American Psychological Association. And then we began meeting right there at their convention. In fact, once we were on the program, and they said, one of them said, yeah, it was in the back of the program, but we were there, that they listed the National Association of Black Psychologists.
Yes,
And then we began having our own separate meetings.
I see.
But they
So-
usually dovetailed on the back of APA, American Psychological Association, the White Association, because we were usually there.
Right.
Yeah.
So just so that I'm clear, so at APA in 1968, black psychologists, they met together as a group, as their
Right.
own group.
Right.
Okay. Was that right before the protest?
That
With
was
James
the
Jackson and
the
everything?
protest was there at that convention.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But was the meeting, did you all gather before the protest, or was it
Oh
after
yes.
the protest?
Oh yes, we gathered.
Okay.
The meetings for the White Association were during the day, and we'd meet at night
Whoa!
and plan strategy.
Ah,
It was all
okay.
planned, yes.
Okay.
And the Black Students Association, that came out of the adult, not the adult, those that were already psychologists and practicing, you know, practicing usually in schools.
I see.
So
Mhm.
they evolved too, their own group.
So at that 1968 APA, and when the black psychologists came together to strategize in one room,
Yes.
was there a decision made to start a National Association of Black Psychologists?
Yes.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay.
Uh-huh.
You were there at that meeting?
Yes.
Then.
Uh-huh. Right.
In that meeting, did anyone say that we have a chapter in Michigan, or they already knew there was a
Oh,
chapter?
they knew that.
They already knew that?
Right.
Ah.
Right.
Oh, that's
There was
amazing.
good communication
So
between
cool.
all of us.
Great.
You know.
So it seems to me that the Michigan chapter could have been like a model for others to get started.
Well,
that
I would
happen?
hesitate to say that, but
Really?
maybe
You
so.
were the first one, right? You're
Yeah.
the only one.
Right.
Did California start their chapter, the Bay Area start theirs after that APA?
Well, they started theirs in California before that meeting,
Okay.
so they claim to be the first chapter.
Okay.
So I can't debate that. I don't know how that was. All I know
Okay.
is we started the day after Martin Luther King was
Right.
assassinated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but anyway, the group in California, I don't know if they kept on with the state chapter. I imagine they
I
did.
think they did the Bay Area ABC.
Bay Area,
I'll
okay.
find out.
All
From
right.
Bennett Cook.
All right,
Dr.
uh-huh.
Cook. I'll find out from here.
Right.
So.
And then Michigan, the National Association of Black Psychologists began a newsletter, you see, that they sent out, and that was a form of communication too,
Right. Right.
to whatever chapters they
Did
had.
Michigan have a newsletter?
Yes, I publish the newsletter every month. Here's the first one, and every month. And my daughter, Avery Robinson, would find jokes or make up jokes to put in it.
Cartoon?
Like this one of the little boy.
No cartoon.
He says, "I paint what I see." And that's from the Saturday Evening Post. But she would find something, or she would make up something.
Oh, that wasn't my cartoon particularly.
No, that was from the Saturday Evening Post.
Oh,
But you did have your own, like
Sure
one
did.
was people were sitting around, the black people, and holding their glasses, and they were singing at the Association of Black Psychologists, "He's a jolly good fellow," that kind of thing. Things like that
Okay,
we
yeah.
made up.
Okay.
I'd have to dig them out. I haven't your jokes, but they were
Oh, wow.
cartoons.
So, were you an officer when the group started in Michigan in April of '68? Did you all develop officers right then and there?
Yes, right away.
So who? Let's see. Who was
Floyd Wiley
was the president?
was the president. Reggie Wilson was the vice president and treasurer, and I was the secretary.
Secretary. So you were the first secretary
Yes.
of the
Yes.
Michigan chapter.
And then Shirley Vaughn and Dozier Thornton from Michigan State were members at large.
Okay. About how many people would come to the meetings?
Oh, maybe about 20.
Wow, 20
Yeah.
at each meeting.
Yeah. We had at least that many at every meeting.
Okay.
And some were students.
Did you said there were some students. Now, Mom, how when did the Michigan chapter host a national ABSI convention?
Yes, we did.
Wow.
And that was have to try to, the year of it.
I can always get that, but just tell me what you remember from it.
Well, it was, see, the Michigan chapter held conventions every year. Once we got started good, the first one,
Or a conference?
well, I see, was not until 1976, Black Genocide, Homicide, and Suicide at the Hilton Hotel. That was a convention we had. And ABC decided to have it. When was it? In August of 1973.
Wow.
Well, that was before we had our individual conference.
Okay. So that was the national conference?
Yes, the convention of National ABC held in Detroit.
Wow.
James Jackson was the president.
What?
Our student, now PhD, was the president.
Wow. What was that like? What do you remember from that convention?
Well, it was just fabulous to me. It was just wonderful. We had all different kinds. They usually have the convention set up interest groups, one with the court system, one with the mental health system, one with the educational system. They were, you go to individual rooms in the hotel and have a conference and speakers on these various subjects and interaction and strategy planning. There was always an action component every time we had a meeting, subcommittee or whatever. There's always action involved, a plan to carry out the goals of that committee.
That is so inspirational. And then in the work that you as a chapter did, I noticed that in the archives there that you all always gave some kind of seminar or something, or conference or something in Black psychology on different topics, like you mentioned genocide, but there were other topics that you all had too.
Well, yes, that
What do you
was
remember
mainly
about that?
during a conference. We called it the workshop.
Yeah, workshops.
We had workshops every year.
Okay, once a year or?
Once a year,
Okay.
right.
I imagine that was a lot of work to put together.
Well, we had committees, we had students that were willing to work hard to get it together. We had a good person to make out the bulletin for us, to the logistics to put everything together. Beulah Tumpkin, she wasn't a psychologist, but she was so willing to help us. And
What other community work did you all do? Other than the workshops, and were the workshops open to the community, or
they
just
were
the Black
open to the
psychologists?
community
Okay.
too. They were advertised in the Michigan Chronicle.
Oh,
Yes,
okay, yeah.
and on the news, the black newscasters, right.
It must have been helpful to community members. But what were some other activities that you all may have done other than the workshops?
Oh,
Between
let's see.
being on the radio stations, black radio stations, or anything?
Not as a group. We didn't do too much of radio
Okay.
or
That's making it
television.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. What was it about the Blue Cross Blue Shield thing?
Well, we formed a committee. See, at one time, Blue Cross Blue Shield would not pay psychologists, generally psychologists in private practice, to see patients as they paid psychiatrists who were part of the medical community. And it so happened that Matthew McNeely was the man, a black man, who was in charge of the committee on Blue Cross Blue Shield, on insurance, general insurance. He happened to live in southwest Detroit, where I lived at one time. So that's how we had contact. And of course, the white psychologist organization, Michigan Psychological Association, and maybe that's where we derived our name, Michigan Association of Black Psychologists, from Michigan Psychological Association, I'm not sure. But anyway, so knowing that they had this contact, they would have a committee going to all the insurance committee meetings in Lansing. And I was part of that committee. And so Matthew McNeely did sign the bill so that psychologists could collect reimbursement from Blue Cross Blue Shield for practicing. And the Michigan Association of Black Psychologists supported McNeely. Like when he had a fundraising dinner, we'd go and give him some money.
There you go.
We were
Partnership.
politically correct. So that's what we did. So actually, Michigan Psychological Association attributed to Michigan Association of Black Psychologists the fact that we were given the credit for getting that bill passed.
Victory.
They benefited, of course.
That was a victory.
But so did we.
Right. That was a victory.
Right.
Can you remember anything about how Detroit's chapter got started?
Detroit?
Yeah. Like,
Oh, Michigan.
Do you know how long the Michigan chapter existed?
Yeah,
And then when Detroit picked up on it,
right.
what do you remember about that?
Well,
Without looking at any.
you see, what happened is once black psychologists were admitted to graduate school because of this PhD programs, because of what the black students did in Washington, the door opened for me to go into a PhD program. Before then, I was a master's level psychologist testing in schools. I always wanted to be a clinical psychologist. So when the door opened, I said, I'm sorry, folks, I can no longer be president of the Michigan Association of Black Psychologists. I have to go after my degree. And so I left, really, and others had to carry it on. And they carried on for about till 1988, and then even 1986 on for a while until about 2003 is when the Michigan Association of Black Psychologists out of Lansing, they took over and they did their thing, and they got burned out and tired, and I think then it went back to Detroit, the Metropolitan Detroit chapter, Association of Black Psychologists. That was Anita Sandy was the first, 1996, and then Sheila Williams White, 1997, and then Angela May until 2003, and then Dr. Amory Robinson came in and was president. Still is.
Kept it going.
Till now, right.
Yeah.
So we'd go back and forth, but we all called ourselves the Michigan Association of Black Psychologists. Even we're the Lansing group did so.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Were you there when Paris Finner Williams was at the dinner table? Yeah, you were. When we tried to regroup the Detroit chapter.
I don't recall that.
Yeah, there's pictures with you in the picture.
Oh.
When it was revived in 2010.
Oh, okay.
You don't remember that meeting because
I
her and
don't.
Robert were there.
No, I
I don't
don't.
remember anything about that. Okay. But who was Paris Finner Williams to you?
Oh, she was absolutely a fantastic psychologist practicing in Detroit. And she even wrote books, and she with her husband Robert Williams, who was the black social worker and head now of that organization, and together they wrote about marriage, a book for marriage couples, black marriage couples. And she was very well loved by all of us, and very bright because she was also an attorney as well as a psychologist. And she became head of the Midwest Association of Black Psychologists, the regional, Midwest regional. But I wasn't involved then at the time, you know, so I may have come back for individual programs they had, but I was not an officer or whatever.
Yeah, I've been talking with Robert Williams, and he told me that Paris really looked up to you.
Oh, I see.
You were like, you know, role model to her.
Bless his heart.
Yeah, he remembers a lot,
Uh-huh.
and I'd like to interview him one day too.
Yes.
he remembers a lot. But
Yes.
Paris really looked up to you.
Yes.
Did you?
That was a dynamic couple. He
Yeah.
and she together.
Mhm.
Very dynamic.
Yeah.
He's a very bright guy and
he's sweet.
well respected amongst the black psychologists.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, he is. He goes to the conventions too. Did
Mhm.
you ever go to a National AB Psych convention yourself?
Yes, in the beginning,
Okay.
when we were going to Washington, when we went to Washington. But after that, did I go?
Mhm.
I'm not so sure that I did. Once I got into the PhD program, I was very poor. I was living on my retirement money I drew from my being a school psychologist, and so I couldn't keep up with things like that.
So there was an association of black psychologists convention in D.C., Washington D.C.
The first one was there.
It was in D.C.
Yeah,
Okay.
the year we organized,
Okay.
that was the first meeting of the national. That's where they formed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they
It
considered
became
that
national.
they considered that an AB Psych convention at APA.
Yes.
At APA. Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So after that, though, you didn't go to any. Did
I
they
don't
have
think
conventions that early, though?
Pardon?
Did they? I'm wondering if they had conventions in 1969
Well,
and
see,
70.
they did. They
Mhm.
always had them
Mhm.
at American Psychological Association
Oh,
convention. At the tail end of that, in the evenings, they would meet.
okay.
They tagged it into that because
I
all
see.
the psychologists were into going to APA, the
Okay.
American Psychological Association, the white conventions.
Right, I
That's the
get
only
that.
thing we knew.
I see. I
And
see.
then, so when the Black Association came along, we just tagged it on there
I see.
because we know people would be
Do
there.
you know how long they did that?
I
How many
don't
years,
know.
or until it
And after,
became?
until they separated. For example, when they came to Detroit, see,
Mhm.
they were autonomous
Right.
from APA. They were not connected with it.
Right. Do you
Right.
know
So
when
I
they-
don't know when that
Hmm.
started.
Okay, all right. I'm just wondering when the convention started, when it was independent, workshops, posted sessions, speakers, our own thing.
Right. That's
So,
a good question.
Okay.
But the archives would tell you if you get the
Mhm.
newsletters,
Yeah.
and I have some of them.
Okay.
I couldn't pass them all on to you, but I have some of them. Maybe you could find out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have all of them
Okay.
because I was not connected with either.
All right. You think
Yeah.
Dr. Willie Scott might know?
He
Because he's
might.
still around. So,
The AP
no problem.
Association of Black Psychologists would know.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would
probably
know.
Yeah, they would know for sure.
Mhm. But that's a good question.
Yeah.
When they separated.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell me about Lejeune? You mentioned a Dr. Lejeune at Michigan State. What do you know
Yes.
about him?
What is his name? June. Dr. Lee June.
Lejeune, right.
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 And he has been active. He was president of the Lansing, Michigan Association of Black Psychologists, 1987 to 88. And he did tell me a few months ago that he wanted to start up the Lansing Association of Black Psychologists again. I don't know what he's done, but anyhow, he's there and he's still at Michigan State University. He's not actively teaching, but he's on the staff.
But he's someone that you know from back when?
Yes.
Oh.
Right.
He came to the meetings and stuff? The Michigan
yes,
chapter
uh-huh.
meetings?
Right.
Okay.
See, when we met sometimes in Lansing. When I say we, the bulk of the people that were part of the Detroit, Michigan Association of Black Psychologists would travel to Lansing for a meeting. We would say, hey, we're coming to meet there, with you on such and such a date. So they would gather their folks and we'd have a joint meeting. And then it came to the point where they took over. They were the active ones. So we were all considered ourselves as part of the Michigan Association of Black Psychologists. It was just that one was in Detroit and one was in Lansing.
So there were contingents in different places.
Right.
And you'd have some from Ann Arbor, from University of Michigan as well?
Right.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
What do you
many
know?
were students now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, graduate students.
Some
mostly.
faculty like Tom Gunnings, he'd come in.
Any from Wayne State University? Any students from Wayne State University?
You know, I don't know of any.
You mentioned a lot Maurice Gardner, but I guess he wasn't active at the
He
time.
wasn't active, but he was our inspiration because he was one of the first clinical psychologists in Michigan to be in private practice.
Wow.
And he was very, very smart. And I'm not sure that he did writings, I'm not so sure.
I know he did articles on therapist-client relationship between race,
Okay.
like having a black therapist, white client, black client, and white therapist. He did an article on that. I
Okay.
remember reading that.
Okay,
Of course,
right.
his sons are still around, and his son, one of his sons, spoke at our ABC Midwest Regional conference that we had in May
Yes,
2017.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for welcoming us through video that day. Welcomed everybody.
Oh, okay.
How did that feel to do that? What did you think
I
about the
was
symposium?
very proud and honored that they'd have me or want
It was
me.
so cool, so cool.
Right.
What do you know about Garrett Morgan? That's a name you brought up to me many times before too.
I
Was
did.
he on it?
Garrett Morgan.
I mean, sorry, Garrett Payne. I'm sorry, Garrett
Oh,
Payne.
Garrett
Morgan. I'm
He
thinking
was
of
a student
Gaskell.
in the Lansing, over in Lansing.
Okay.
And he wasn't much involved with us, but he happened to be out in Southfield, and we had wanted at one time to start a mental health clinic
Okay.
that would be approved and where black MA students could, under supervision practice. And it never really came off the ground. We really couldn't do it.
Okay. Were there were there black psychologists that were interested in ABC but just didn't join?
There were
officially, or-
some that were the first psychologists. For example, Juanita.
Doss? Juanita Doss?
No.
Oh, okay.
Juanita Collier. She taught some of us at Wayne State University. She was an educational psychologist, and at one time she was out at Hawthorne Center. And she was an inspiration, but she never got involved with the association.
Okay. So there were
And I
people like her.
misspoke. She wasn't at Hawthorne. She was at Wayne State University. Winifred Ingram was a psychologist out on permanent staff at Hawthorne Center. So when I interned out there, she was one of my,
Okay.
teachers.
So there were psychologists like that would
not be involved.
Yeah.
Leon Hall was another one.
Okay.
He was never involved. Right.
But they would come and support your programs.
No, they
events and
didn't
things?
appear. No.
You didn't?
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow, that's
No.
too bad. How did you keep people interested over the years? 'Cause-
Oh, it wasn't
Would
me
you-
keeping them interested.
Yeah, but what was it that kept people going each year? The black psychologists going.
Because we were black
Organization.
psychologists and
Mhm.
it suited our interests. We
Mhm.
knew there was a need in the
Yeah.
black community,
Mhm.
and we had needs for better instruments of testing, for example.
Mhm.
So it served their need.
Okay. Wasn't your coffee then, huh?
It was not my coffee. It
Wow.
was the camaraderie. You see, when there's
Mhm.
so few of you, it feels good to get together with the other few and
Mhm.
compare notes.
Wow, golly.
So I think that was a lot of it.
I would bet there were things that you got out of it too, like friendships. Can you tell me about that?
I'm not so sure about that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I developed any friendships out of it.
No.
Well, with my office partners later, I was friends.
Mm-hmm.
Down the Fisher building.
Right.
They're fast friends, but they were never involved
Mm.
with the Michigan Association of Black Psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
So some
Wow.
black psychologists were not involved.
Wow.
could care less, I guess. I'm not sure the reasons, but
Do people make friendships? The
Um,
meetings?
Garrett Payne and I are friends,
Okay.
but he never came to any meetings, so
Okay,
he
right.
wasn't much involved.
Right. I mean,
So-
okay, so anything else you got out of being a member of the Association of Black Psychologists that are important to you?
Well, the thing is that there was such a need, and still is, in the black community.
Mm-hmm.
And some organization need to be responsible to try to address those needs,
Right.
or bring a greater society of social scientists or whoever, financial institutions, need to bring this to their attention, that they're being unfair and discriminating. And they need to take into consideration blacks have a unique culture that is ours, and it needs to be respected and to be included in whatever they do. So that for me was it.
What are some of the issues of today that you think black psychologists are needed for?
Perhaps the main thing is having more of us able to be able to provide mental health work. I think that's the greatest thing. Because there's still too few of us. When a black person wants therapy, he's often met by a white psychologist, or else there'd be some interaction or training that blacks could give to white therapists so that they understand differences and to help them to be able to relate to our people. The other great thing I think is still in the schools. Our black children are just not progressing as much, and we need so much. The relevancy of having books where black children are featured in positive lights, rather than with the stereotypes, is one way of getting to black children. But we have so much catching up to do. Not that our values have to be those of the white society, but we do want children who grow up to be culturally competent in living in a white society. And so there's a great need in the educational system to reduce the gap between, black children, what they get out of the school system, and white children. I think that's one gap. That's very important we diminish.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Anything you want to say about the 50th anniversary that's coming up, 2018, in a few months?
Of the National Association of Black Psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
I am so proud of the National Association of Black Psychologists. When we started out, there were so few of us. And when you took me to the Atlanta meeting, I think that was a Midwest
region.
Midwest
I'm
meeting.
sorry. Yeah, it was mid-year. Yeah.
Meeting. I was so proud to see the young people, and they're so competent and bright and able, doing all the good work that they do. And to think of that as, multiplied by others. I'm not sure how many members we have with National, but whatever we have, to see that increase and that competence that the younger people had, I just have hope for the future because of that. I really do.
Wow, golly.
Right.
And I'm going to ask the question that everybody would probably have on their mind to ask you is, how do you feel about your daughter becoming National Board Secretary of ABPSI this year?